This case takes place in the UK in the year 2024. Meet Kyle Marcus Clifford. Kyle was born on the 5th of April 1998 in Enfield, North London. He grew up as the third of 4 children in a close-knit household, and by all accounts, he grew up in a loving home. Nothing in Kyle's early home life signalled the darkness that was to come. However, according to his teachers at school, Kyle was known to be like a Jekyll and Hyde character. To some, Kyle was a massive bully and was known throughout the school for his violence. Despite this, he was never permanently expelled. But some who knew him saw a different side. One woman who grew up with Kyle recalled that he always seemed pretty normal. She even called him a nice guy. The two would hang out together, and he never struck her as odd or aggressive. Kyle had his first brushes with the law in his mid-teens. Around 2012-2013, the police took notice of him for a string of minor offences. These were for possession of weed, minor assault without injury, and a petty theft. He was only around 14 or 15 at the time, and no charges were ultimately filed. Still, these incidents put him on the radar of the authorities and foreshadowed a pattern of disturbing behaviour. Kyle also had a brother, a man named Bradley. Bradley received a life sentence in 2018 for a murder committed during a road rage rampage. Bradley was frustrated by 2 motorcyclists whilst driving as they had hit his car. Bradley wasn't going to let them get away with this, so he chased them down and hit them from their motorbikes. One was seriously injured, and the other youth tragically died. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 23 years. After finishing school, Kyle did not pursue a higher education. At 21 years old, he sought a new path in the military. In 2019, he enlisted in the British Army, joining the Queen's Dragoon Guards as a trooper. This must have seemed like an odd choice, given his clear contempt for authority. His army career proved brief. Kyle served for around 2 years and dropped out in 2022 without completing any active tour. In fact, he was at home sick for over 250 days of his service. His dismissal was reportedly due to internal issues during his service. It's difficult to understand what this means on the surface, but as we delve a little deeper, a former army colleague later described him as an immature recruit who had a bit of a chip on his shoulder. He also noted that Kyle struggled with basic military discipline, even though he did manage to pass his training. And so, following his brief career in the army, he returned to Enfield as a young adult, and he drifted between some more short-lived jobs. At one point he took a job with a catering company, but a dispute arose when there were allegations of inappropriate conduct on his part, and he left that position as well. And it's this pattern of instability that was becoming his norm. And Kyle's personal relationships weren't any better. He never married and had no children, but in 2023 he began dating a 25-year-old woman named Louise Hunt. Louise Hunt was born in 1999, and she was the youngest of 3 daughters to John and Carol Hunt. Her father, John Hunt, is a respected BBC racing commentator and a former police officer. The Hunt family resided in Bushey, Hertfordshire, and was known for their close-knit and private nature. Louise had 2 sisters, Hannah, who was born in 1996, and Amy, who was born in 1993. Growing up, Louise had a passion for animals, and she pursued her passion for animals by establishing a dog grooming business, which quickly became a thriving enterprise in her community. She had an outbuilding at the back of the family home, which she used for her dog grooming centre. Neighbours and clients frequently praised her dedication and her quality of work, and her business was thriving. In her personal life, Louise was described as a kind and gentle individual, and she was looking for love. So she downloaded the dating app Bumble. It's on this app where Kyle and Louise met, and their relationship was serious. The pair were together for around 8 months, and Kyle became a familiar face to her family. However, the romance was far from idyllic and descended into darkness. Friends later revealed that Louise grew fearful of Kyle's, quote, nasty temper and his increasingly aggressive behaviour. Unbeknownst to her, Kyle was also unfaithful. He had flings with 2 female co-workers behind Louise's back during their relationship. By the 26th of June 2024, Louise decided that she could no longer tolerate his erratic, intimidating behaviour, and so she ended the toxic relationship. However, Kyle did not take the breakup too well. Kyle was the kind of person who always craved admiration, and he never handled rejection gracefully. Those close to him observed that he felt entitled to a woman's attention and their respect, and he seethed when challenged or refused. According to some sources, he was a fan of Andrew Tate. Tate is known for pushing extreme views about men and women, and some of those views have been described as openly misogynistic. Kyle didn't just follow that line of thinking, he totally embodied it. However, it's unfair to blame what was to follow on anyone other than Kyle Clifford. The end of this relationship left him feeling humiliated and angry, which was a dangerous emotional state given his history. By summer of 2024, Kyle was 26 years old and was on the brink. A former soldier with no job, a violent streak, and a recent breakup that shook him. To some, he still looked like the quiet young man from Enfield, but underneath, pressure was building. Just days after his breakup, Kyle had one final outburst. He launched a brutal attack. The method was cold, and the weapon was silent. He destroyed a family, horrified a country, and earned the name, the Crossbow Killer. On the afternoon of the 9th of July 2024, Kyle arrived at the Hunt family's house in Hertfordshire. He parked his car on a quiet street near Ashling Close, just a short walk away from where the Hunt family lived. From there, he stepped out and walked the area, surveying the driveway. He checked which vehicles were present, trying to confirm who exactly was inside the home. He needed to be sure that the father, John Hunt, wasn't home, as of course, in true coward fashion, John would pose as an obstacle to his horrific plan. As I mentioned, John was a sports commentator for the BBC and Sky, and often worked on horse racing days, and so Kyle listened on the radio if he could hear John at work. He searched racing schedules confirming what he had suspected. John was away at work, and wouldn't be able to stop him. Inside Kyle's car were weapons and tools, a crossbow and bolts, a 25cm butcher's knife, some rope, duct tape, and a can of petrol. It was a kill kit that he had assembled in the days after Louise Hunt had ended their relationship. His intentions were very clear. If he couldn't have Louise, nobody could, and he wasn't going to let anyone get in his way. At 30 minutes past 2, he gained entry into the house. Concealing the large knife in his rucksack, Kyle walked up to the Hunt's front door and rang the doorbell. Louise's mother Carol answered the door. Kyle said he was returning some of Louise's things and that he had a thank you card to Carol and John Hunt. But he had lied. The doorbell camera recorded her voice. She was calm and kind. Carol can be heard even sympathizing with Kyle about the breakup, even saying, "I don't think you're a nasty person," as she lets him inside the house. Once Carol turned her back, Kyle suddenly began to attack. He pulled out the butcher's knife and stabbed Carol multiple times in the chest and abdomen, inflicting fatal wounds. The home's doorbell camera, equipped with audio, captured their brief exchange and the haunting sounds of the ensuing struggle inside. Carol collapsed near the entrance of the home, bleeding profusely. After overpowering Carol, Kyle didn't flee immediately. Instead, he dragged and nudged Carol's body out of plain view of the doorway and waited, listening to ensure that she was incapacitated. Investigators believe that Kyle lingered for over 30 minutes, watching Carol die from her injuries before proceeding. During this interval, no one else was inside the house. At 15:07, the doorbell camera records Kyle exiting the house. He walked back to his parked car and retrieved a crossbow, along with crossbow bolts. To avoid drawing attention, he hid the crossbow under a white blanket and returned to the property just a few minutes later. Now armed with a crossbow in addition to his knife, Kyle re-entered the Hunt family home to lie in wait for his next victim. During this period, Louise Hunt was busy working in the detached outbuilding on the property, where she operated her dog grooming business. This was called The Pod. She was completely unaware of the horror unfolding inside the house just meters away. Kyle remained hidden inside the main house, checking through the windows and listening for Louise's return. He avoided going outside where he might have been seen by some customers. Carol's lifeless body was still near the front entrance. Kyle's patience was chilling as he lay in wait for well over an hour. At 4:11, Louise finished with her last client and stepped out from the garden studio into the main house. The doorbell camera's audio picked up Louise moving about inside. Almost immediately, her voice turned into a scream. Kyle ambushed Louise moments after she entered. A sustained altercation ensued, which neighbours and the security audio later described as high-pitched screaming, male shouting, followed by some banging. This came from the Hunt family home at around 4:11 and lasted for 15 minutes. These noises suggest that Louise was immensely fearful and fought fiercely for her life, but tragically at some point, Kyle managed to overpower her. This was likely at 4:26 as the sounds at this point stopped. Kyle had duct-taped her arms and feet together and placed a gag into her mouth. Over the next several hours, he tortured Louise with physical violence and repeatedly forced himself upon her. A truly deeply sinister act of violence and spite in retaliation for Louise's rejection of him. She sustained numerous injuries during this period, but she remained alive. At around 5:30, Kyle left the house and stepped into the backyard outbuilding where Louise's phone was. Using her phone, Kyle sent a text message to her father, John Hunt, inquiring when he would be home. This deceptive message was meant to ensure that John didn't return home unexpectedly. Kyle wanted to confirm that he had more time before any potential intervention. Next, Kyle used the phone's internet browser to search how to disable smoke alarms. More specifically, he searched whether unplugging a smoke detector disconnects it completely. These searches suggest that Kyle was considering burning the house down to destroy any evidence and to cover his sinister crimes. After messaging John, Kyle returned to the main house. The home was then eerily quiet. Louise was still bound and gagged, Carol was fatally wounded, and the curtains were drawn. Kyle now waited for the arrival of the third family member, Hannah. At 6:49, Hannah Hunt, Louise's older sister, arrived home from work. She packed up and walked towards the house. Kyle Clifford saw Hannah coming. Louise was still alive indoors, but tragically not for long. With Hannah only seconds away from entering, Kyle decided to eliminate Louise to prevent any chance of her calling out. He raised the crossbow and shot Louise through the back at close range. The crossbow bolt struck Louise and pierced her internal organs. Moments later, Hannah opened the front door and stepped inside the home. She immediately shouted for her mother, but there was no answer. She noticed that something was horribly wrong. She saw blood and signs of a struggle in the entrance. Hannah then proceeded to cautiously walk upstairs. At 6:51, Hannah reached the upstairs landing where she suddenly came face to face with Kyle Clifford. Hannah knew that something was up and she began screaming and crying at just the sight of him. Hannah tried to run away and at the same time quickly got out her phone. Kyle attempted to calm her down and she sent a text message to her boyfriend Alex asking him to call the police. But then Kyle grabbed Hannah and he was able to tie her up. Just moments later, Kyle fired a bolt straight into Hannah's chest from the front at close range. Hannah screamed as she was hit and collapsed. The bolt punctured her chest, causing a grievous wound, but she did not die immediately. At this point, Hannah still didn't know for sure what had happened in the house. However, audio from the security system suggests that just moments after she was shot, Hannah crawled and stumbled upon the bodies of her mother and sister. A blood-curdling scream is heard at around 6:57 on the recording, which investigators later interpreted as the moment Hannah finally realized the fate of her beloved family. Following this, Kyle decided to escape before the police arrived. He grabbed his crossbow, leaving one of his bolts in Louise and one in Hannah. He rushed down the stairs and out of the door. A neighbour's CCTV camera later captured footage of Kyle hurrying to his car, carrying a bag, and then speeding off. It was roughly 58 minutes past 6 when Kyle drove away from the Hunt's home. Back inside, Hannah was clinging on to life. Despite the crossbow bolt embedded into her chest, Hannah was able to summon the strength to act. She managed to free herself enough to reach a mobile phone and dialed 999. Hannah's call connected to the emergency operator. She could barely speak as she was gasping for air as her lungs filled with blood. But she managed to report that she, her mother, and her sister had been shot. She identified their address before the line went dead. This 999 call was extraordinarily heroic. Hannah was mortally wounded, and she used her last moments to call for help. This triggered an immediate police response, and they soon arrived on the scene. On the evening of the 9th of July 2024, at approximately 7 p.m, armed response and paramedics arrived at the scene. They were treating the situation as an active attack, with a dangerous suspect at large. So several armed response units arrived, and within minutes of being at the house, officers entered the home to secure the scene for medical personnel. Inside, they discovered Carol near the entrance. She was already deceased from the stab wounds. Louise's lifeless body was found inside the house, and Hannah Hunt was found barely alive. Officers quickly carried Hannah out of the house to receive medical aid, but despite the paramedics' best efforts, her injuries were too severe. Hannah was sadly pronounced dead at the scene a short time after. Although there were no surviving witnesses, clues about who did this were extremely abundant. There was a text message from Hannah naming Kyle Clifford as the attacker. CCTV footage was found of him fleeing, and the fact that Louise's ex-boyfriend was known to the family. By 7:10, the police had confirmed the total of 3 victims and urgently relayed details of their prime suspect, Kyle Clifford. A county-wide manhunt was launched, with Hertfordshire officers alerting the Metropolitan Police in neighbouring London to look out for Kyle or his black car. A public alert was also issued, stating that Kyle was armed and dangerous, and that citizens should call 999 if they saw him. At approximately 7:30, Kyle drove east and crossed into North London. He then abandoned his car and ventured on foot. As nighttime fell, he hid near a cemetery and a wooded park known as Hilly Fields. Kyle evaded immediate capture that night by hiding in dense undergrowth and amongst the graves. According to reports, he had brought with him a rope and even planned to use it. Kyle managed to remain at large as an intensive search conducted through the early hours of the 10th of July. The police swept through the area, and by morning they focused on the vicinity of the cemetery and wooded area, as they had found Kyle's abandoned vehicle nearby. On the 10th of July 2024, at approximately 6 p.m, nearly 22 hours after the murders, the manhunt came to an end. The police spotted the coward lying in the undergrowth inside the cemetery, not too far away from his home. As armed officers and a police dog approached to apprehend him, Kyle fired the crossbow into his chest. The bolt seriously injured him, and later reports indicated that the shot paralyzed him from the chest down. Officers quickly disarmed him and rendered first aid before rushing him to hospital under guard as he bled profusely. At the scene, police recovered the blood-stained crossbow used in the killings, along with a hunting knife believed to be the murder weapon for Carol. The manhunt was over, and the community could breathe a small sigh of relief. Subsequent police investigations and court proceedings meticulously reconstructed the timeline and the sequence of the murders. Key findings included the orders of the deaths. Carol Hunt was confirmed to be killed first, followed by Louise, and finally Hannah. This sequence was confirmed by forensic evidence and the content of Hannah's own messages. The family's security system also proved to be crucial. Investigators reviewing the audio could timestamp when exactly everything happened. This, along with Hannah's text message to her boyfriend and her 999 call, were pivotal in both alerting the authorities in real time and later corroborating the timeline of events. The fact that Hannah managed to send that message while in mortal danger and call 999 after being shot was noted by the police as an extraordinary act of bravery. The police credited Hannah's actions with helping ensure Kyle's quick capture, as officers were on his trail within minutes of the attack. While Kyle was recovering, the police investigated the motive and the possible lead-up to the events on the 9th. It was later found that during a visit to a hardware store, he purchased reels of rope and petrol cans. It was then found that he purchased his £350 crossbow, his ammunition, a cocking device to reload, and the knife online. He knew the routines of his victims, along with John Hunt. He carefully built up his arsenal. His plan to kill was obviously premeditated. Also, the officers discovered letters that Kyle had written, both to himself and his family. They were saturated in self-pity, as a judge would later remark. He tried apologizing to his family, saying that there was nothing they could have done to stop him, and that it was not their fault. He wrote the letter to himself, saying how he could have moved on from Louise, found the woman of his dreams and have children like he always wanted. But he wasn't going to do that. After recovering from his wounds, Kyle was interviewed in September of 2024. He attended this in his wheelchair. Kyle's demeanour during this interrogation was described as emotionless. He sat there, offering no responses to the questions posed by law enforcement officials. This lack of engagement persisted throughout the interview process and highlighted just how little he cared. His refusal to speak extended to his trial, where he actually declined to attend the proceedings. This consistent pattern of non-engagement highlighted his unwillingness to confront the consequences of his own actions and contributed to the perception of his lack of remorse. He only pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder after several rejections to do so. He pleaded guilty to the possession of the crossbow and similar charges, but despite DNA evidence, he pleaded not guilty to essaying Louise. In the end, the jury heard how Kyle had cowardly planned an attack for over 11 days and brutally ended the lives of 3 innocent women. During his sentencing hearing on the 11th of March 2025, the judge did not hesitate or cause any suspense in his final remarks. He began by laying bare just how jealous, misogynistic, and weak he truly was. Then came the sentence: 3 life terms, each to be served as a whole life tariff. No minimum term or chance of release. Kyle Clifford will spend the rest of his miserable life behind bars. Carol, Hannah, and Louise brought much joy to those around them. Each of them had so much ahead, futures filled with milestones, celebrations, and quiet moments of happiness. All of it destroyed, taken in an instant by a brutal and unforgivable act of violence. John Hunt, the husband and the father of the victims, delivered a powerful impact statement. He addressed Kyle directly, stating, "The screams of hell, Kyle. I can hear them faintly now, and they're going to roll out the red carpet just for you." John recounted the profound loss he experienced and described the moment he spent 4 hours with his deceased family members at the funeral home. Amy Hunt, the surviving sister, also addressed the court, calling Kyle a monster and stating that his actions were nothing short of demonic.